They bullied him mercilessly at school, but he didn't break down. Instead, he grew up to become strong and influential. Find out what he did to them. Jacob was born in the quiet town of Hamilton in southwestern Ohio. Life there was uneventful. The streets were lined with two-story houses, and neighbors knew each other by name. His father, Thomas, was a mechanic who worked at a garage on the highway, which was always full of trucks. His mother was a night shift nurse. The family was not wealthy, but their home was disciplined, peaceful, and respectful. From childhood, Jacob was an observant boy. While other kids were playing ball in the yard, he sat in the garage with his father, taking apart old generators and batteries, examining them as if they were treasures. He was fascinated by science, read superhero comics, and dreamed that one day he too would become strong, not physically, but strong in spirit. However, his school years were a real challenge. Already in middle school, Jacob became the target of constant bullying. His shyness, old glasses, and lack of brand-name clothes were all reasons for ridicule. He was called a nerd, a loser, and a weirdo. At first, he tried to ignore it, but the bullying only got worse. Once, on the school bus, he was pushed out of his seat and onto the floor. Another day, his belongings were shaken out of his backpack and thrown into the mud at the school entrance. The worst happened in the locker room. He was pushed into a shower stall, the door was locked, and the cold water was turned on. The whole class laughed while Jacob stood there, shivering, his hair wet, his teeth clenched. At home, he was silent. He couldn't say anything to his parents, not because they were indifferent, but because he didn't want to appear weak. But at night, he lay with his eyes wide open, clenching his teeth, and in his mind he relived those humiliations over and over again. No one noticed the anger growing inside him, but even stronger were the shame and helplessness. One evening was a turning point. After a particularly humiliating incident, when he was forced to crawl in front of the class for a shoe that someone had thrown in the trash, Jacob returned home silent. His mother, Mary, looked at her son and realized that something had broken inside him. She said nothing, just took his father's old army duffel bag from the closet. "Today we're going to change something," she said calmly. They arrived at a small self-defense gym in an industrial part of town. The old coach, Ray, a Marine veteran, looked at the skinny boy and said, "If you're here, it means you don't just want to defend yourself. You want to change, and that's good." The first few weeks were tough. Jacob fell, broke down, and cried during training. But he kept coming back. Every day, he didn't dream of becoming aggressive. He dreamed of not being afraid. And for the first time in his life, he felt that something depended on him. A year later, he was unrecognizable. The bullies stopped picking on him at school. He didn't threaten them or respond with rudeness. His gaze, his posture, and his confident silence were enough. He became stronger, but he didn't lose his humanity. And most importantly, he didn't turn into those who had once destroyed him emotionally. That was just the beginning. After his first year in the self-defense class, Jacob was no longer the same scared boy. But the real test was just beginning, life outside of school. After graduating from high school, he had no clear plans. College seemed out of reach. He had little money and no scholarships. He got a job as a warehouse worker at a local warehouse in Cincinnati. The work was hard, with 12-hour shifts and calluses on his hands. But Jacob didn't complain. His body grew stronger. His muscles became hard as steel cables. But more importantly, a new character was forming in his mind. He woke up at 5, went to morning training, then to work, and returned to the gym in the evening. Ray, his coach, became more than a mentor to him. He taught him not only how to punch and defend himself, he taught him control, endurance, and how to make decisions without emotion. "You don't have to be scary to be respected," he said, "but you have to be able to act when you need to." On weekends, Jacob started helping out at the gym, cleaning, handing out water, and later coaching newcomers. For the first time, he felt like he could be useful, that he had the knowledge and experience that others needed. One day, a father and son came to the gym. The boy was shy, like Jacob had been 10 years ago. During a break, the father approached Jacob. "He doesn't talk about it, but I can see that something is wrong with him at school. Can you help him?" Jacob looked at the boy for a long time before answering. "I can, because I know what it's like to be in his shoes." He began to train this boy separately. He told him stories. He showed him how to breathe when he was afraid, how to stop his hand before striking. The boy changed. and it was inspiring. Soon, there were more students like him. Jacob didn't ask for money or promise miracles. He just gave what had once saved him. At 23, Jacob already had a stable job as a security guard at a large shopping mall. The salary was modest, but it allowed him to rent a separate apartment and save a little for the future. He had no entertainment, no vacations. He invested everything in knowledge. He took courses in security tactics, psychology of behavior in critical situations, and even learned the basics of legal responsibility in cases of self-defense. The idea of starting his own business came to him unexpectedly. One evening, while he was filling in for a colleague at the reception desk, a woman he had trained a few months earlier approached him. She worked as an administrator at a local medical center and told him that after training with Jacob, she had been able to avoid an attack in an underground parking lot. "I should have thanked you then, but I was afraid to think about that evening again. But I'm alive and safe thanks to you." Those words were like an explosion inside him. For the first time, Jacob felt that what he was doing was not just a skill, but a chance for others to experience the strength and freedom he had once gained himself. He returned home and spent the entire night writing in a notebook a list of ideas, plans, principles, and most importantly, the name he wanted to give his future center, Silent Power. The idea of turning his personal story into a life's work never left Jacob. Every evening, he sat over his notes, thinking about how to turn a small initiative into a real business that would change people's lives. Not just a gym, a space where anyone who had once been broken could pick themselves back up again. The first step was to find a place. He drove around half the city until he found an abandoned auto repair shop in the eastern part of Cincinnati. The place had peeling walls, rusty pipes, and a concrete floor with traces of grease still visible. But Jacob didn't see a ruin. He saw a future. Most people would have given up when they saw the scale of the renovation. But he took on everything himself. He plastered, painted, and brought in old tatami mats that Ray, his first coach, had given him. On weekends, he was helped by students who had taken his courses. They carried bags of cement, dragged wooden beams, and nailed boards. Some of them had no money, but wanted to show their gratitude with their own hands. For months later, the doors of Silent Power opened. There was no pomp, no ribbons, no champagne. Just a marker sign on the glass. Training begins. 7 people came in the first week. A month later, there were already 32. Among them were teenagers who had been bullied at school, women who had survived domestic violence, and elderly people who wanted to feel more confident. At every training session, Jacob repeated, "Strength is not in your fists. It is in your back, which no longer crumples in fear." Jacob's methods were different from the usual ones. He didn't teach how to fight. He taught how to read a situation, how to avoid threats, speak firmly, and move with confidence. His favorite phrase was, "Defense starts with your eyes." He introduced weekly sessions with a psychologist who helped clients work through their trauma. He organized night training sessions for security guards and drivers, as well as master classes on defense in confined spaces, such as elevators and underground parking lots. The number of bookings grew. He didn't spend the first money he earned on himself. He replaced the tatami mats, bought protective vests, and hired another instructor. Everything he earned, he invested back into the center. His goal was not to get rich. He wanted no one else in this city to go through what he had gone through. The local media took notice. A journalist from a small online newspaper interviewed him, and the article, "Former Victim of Bullying Opens Self-Defense Center," went viral on social media. After that, he was invited to appear on television and then to a youth safety conference in Chicago. His name began to be heard, but he remained modest. He continued to live in a one-room apartment, drive an old pickup truck, and go jogging every morning at 5 o'clock. But one evening, scrolling through his news feed, he came across a familiar face. A name from his past. One of his former tormentors was now in the news. Jacob looked at the screen and, for the first time in years, felt something dark and indescribable flare up in his chest. Memories came flooding back. The school locker room, the cold shower, the laughter, and then, for the first time, an idea formed in his mind. Not as a businessman, but as a survivor. Revenge isn't always evil. Sometimes it's just paying back a debt. Jacob couldn't sleep that night. The face of Brandon, one of the main instigators of the school terror, was frozen on his phone screen. The one who always smiled when he pushed Jacob to the floor. The one who once whispered in his ear, "You won't live to see graduation, nerd." And now Brandon was in a suit, standing in front of some office building, giving a comment on TV as a representative of a financial company. Successful, smiling, with deep bruises on his soul that he had left on others. Jacob saved the screenshot. Then he opened other social networks. The names came up on their own: Matt, Justin, Zach, Nick. He started searching and found almost everyone. Someone became a gym trainer. Someone became a firefighter. One opened a car repair shop. It wasn't an obsession. It was research. Cold, methodical. Over the next few weeks, Jacob compiled a list. Names, addresses, social media profiles, work schedules, habits. He didn't plan to act impulsively. He wasn't going to punish them physically. He didn't need to. His plan was as precise as the punches he had taught, not to break, but to make them remember. He rented a small warehouse on the outskirts of town, an old hangar with no windows. Inside, he set up several cameras, a microphone, and a few lamps. And most importantly, everything he needed to create: the atmosphere, metal chairs, sound effects, perfectly designed lighting. And most importantly, he made sure that their faces remained in shadow. He prepared a separate stage for each of them. He wasn't going to torture them. It was enough for him that they believed they couldn't get out of there. The first was Matt, the one who once forced Jacob to undress in class while his classmates shouted "model." Now he was a manager at a local company. Jacob found out his schedule and intercepted him late at night in the parking lot. It was quick, like lightning. Handcuffs, a bag over his head, complete silence. When Matt came to, he was already in a chair, tied up. In front of him was a figure in black, his face hidden. Brick walls. No windows, no clock. "Do you know how many nights I've spent awake, afraid that tomorrow would come again?" A voice rang out, deep but calm. "Today is your tomorrow." Matt began to beg, to justify himself, to remember that it was a long time ago, that he didn't think it would hurt so much. Jacob didn't answer. He just turned on the audio, a recording of Matt himself in ninth grade laughing at the humiliation. Then came the words, "You're nobody, and nobody's going to help you." And finally, silence. An hour passed. 2 hours. Matt trembled, losing all sense of time. Jacob looked at him and felt neither anger nor satisfaction. Only justice. After he untied Matt and led him out into a dark alley, he said only one thing: "I didn't do anything to you, but now you understand what it's like to be a victim with no choice." He walked into the shadows without looking back. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. After the incident with Matt, Jacob returned home and sat in the dark for a long time. He felt neither triumph nor relief, only a strange inner calm. He hadn't broken any laws or caused any harm, but something had changed. Instead of hiding his pain, he began to return it, without malice, but with precision. Next on the list was Zach, a former joker who had poured soda on him in the school cafeteria, tied his backpack to the bus railing, and ripped off his glasses and threw them on the floor for laughs. Now Zach worked at the front desk of a gym, taught fitness classes, and posted photos with quotes about motivation and positive thinking. The irony did not escape Jacob. Everything he promoted was the opposite of his true self. And now it was time to look in the mirror. Jacob again used his no-trace technique: observation, timing, minimal contact. Zach was intercepted in the backyard of the gym late at night. When he came to, he was sitting in a chair, chained by his hands and feet. The only light in the room came from a lamp above his head and the same peeling brick walls. "Remember how funny it was to watch me pick up my things from the floor?" came a voice from the darkness. "What? Who are you?" Zach gasped. "If this is a bad joke, then you know how to play pranks. We all remember." A screen descended from the wall. A video began, edited from old social media posts, old photos, even videos that Jacob had once saved. In the background, Zach was laughing, pushing someone into the water, taking pictures with the caption, "Rule the weak." His face was smug and arrogant. "Tonight is the night you'll find out what it's like to be someone who isn't listened to," said the voice in the darkness. "Just sit there and listen to yourself." For 2 hours, the only sound in the room was a recording of phrases used to humiliate Jacob. "No one will protect you. You're just a shadow, loser." Zach broke down after an hour. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He begged. He said he was sorry, that he was different back then, that everything had changed now. Jacob took off his chains. He gave him warm water and said, "If you've really changed, prove it to those who are going through hell right now. Work with them. Listen. Help. Otherwise, I'll be back." Zach nodded silently and walked into the night. Meanwhile, Silent Power was growing. New clients, new stories. Jacob already had 3 instructors, including a former client who had survived a street attack. He gave lectures in schools, talking about strength without aggression. But inside, the list still burned. 6 more. They lived their normal lives. They had no idea that someone remembered every joke they ever made, and that someone was getting closer. The next target was Nick, one of the most dangerous guys in Jacob's school past. While others bullied for fun, Nick did it with cold cruelty. He never yelled or laughed loudly. His blows were silent but precise. Once, Nick locked Jacob in the gym basement for several hours without any light. He stood silently behind the door, listening to Jacob knocking and begging for help. Now Nick worked for a delivery service. His social media photos showed smiles, picnics, a girlfriend, dogs. A life he seemed to have never feared. But there was no fear yet. Jacob decided it was time. The kidnapping was carefully planned. Nick usually came home late after his evening shift. That evening, when he went up to his apartment, only a dark hallway awaited him, and a sharp blow to the back. He opened his eyes a few minutes later. A wall, ropes, the dull sound of a fan. And again, a figure in the shadows. "Do you remember me?" the voice asked calmly. "What? Who are you?" Nick tried to lift his head, but the ropes held him tight. "I am your shadow, your memory, your former friend whom you locked in the basement for 3 hours." Nick shuddered. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Jacob came closer, but remained in the darkness. He placed a mirror in front of Nick, and it was the frightened face of a man whom no one feared anymore. "Do you know what made you more dangerous than the others?" said the voice. "You didn't do it for fun. You did it because you could, and you kept quiet. Silence is the worst weapon of violence." Jacob placed a small projector in front of him. The words "silence is not an excuse" appeared on the wall. "I don't want your apologies. I want you to feel what it's like to be defenseless," he said. "At least for a few hours." There was no clock in the room. There were no windows. There was no sound except for the rhythmic dripping of water from the pipe. Time dragged on forever. Jacob sat in the corner. He watched, and he was silent, just as Nick had been silent back then in the school basement. 3 hours later, he got up and untied the ropes. Before leaving, he left a note that read, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Now it's your turn to think about what to do about it." Nick left silently. Silence followed him. Meanwhile, life was bustling at the Silent Power Center. Jacob began receiving letters from people in different states. They called him the man who teaches how to stand without raising a fist. They offered to open branches, gave interviews, and asked for lectures. He agreed to only one thing: to speak to teenagers, those who were now on the brink, those who had not yet become victims, and had not become perpetrators. But the night was for something else. At night, he returned to the list. 3 more. And each of them was a symbol that fear is never forgotten, but it can be overcome. Next was Justin, once the loudest and most colorful kid in the class. He didn't hit anyone. He didn't use words to humiliate others. But he laughed. Always. The worst part was that he laughed when Jacob was being beaten up by the others. His laughter sounded worse than the blows, because it was approval. Approval of violence. Now Justin worked as a TV presenter on a local channel. Sports stories, evening shows, smiling for the camera. His voice flowed from the screens of shops, cafes, gas stations. Jacob hesitated at first. This target was riskier. A public figure, cameras, attention. But something inside told him that Justin was the key. Because Justin embodied what most people don't notice: the indifference that fuels evil. He didn't plan the kidnapping. This time, he had a different tactic. One evening, Justin went off the air. A courier was waiting for him in the dressing room. The package, as it turned out, contained a flash drive. On it was a video, an old archive video from a phone, taken back in 11th grade. Jacob is being pushed and beaten, and in the frame is Justin, laughing and holding the camera. On the screen is the caption, "You were a spectator." But laughter is also participation. Next was another recording. Jacob, now an adult, looked into the camera. He spoke calmly. "I haven't forgotten. Your voice is part of my nights. But I don't want your tears. I want you to remember what it's like to watch and do nothing. Now try to remain silent in front of everyone who listens to you every day." A week later, Justin disappeared from the airwaves. Officially, he was on leave for personal reasons. In reality, according to friends, he was depressed. His social media accounts were deleted. He left a note of apology to his colleagues at the office. Meanwhile, Silent Power entered a new phase of growth. Jacob introduced a program called Turning Point, a course for teenagers who had been expelled from school for aggression. They were brought here on the recommendation of psychologists. And for the first time in their lives, they heard not screams, but understanding. "I know you were angry," Jacob said. "So was I. But I learned that real strength isn't where broken bones are. It's where hearts aren't broken." Some of the students began to speak for the first time. They cried for the first time. And they hugged for the first time. And in each of them, Jacob saw himself, in the shadows, before coming out into the light. Around that time, he received a strange letter. No signature, just a few sentences. "We know. We're watching. Stop before it's too late. We remember you differently." The handwriting was familiar, perhaps one of those still on the list. Jacob held the envelope in his hands for a long time. Then he hung it on the wall, next to the mirror he looked at every night. Because real enemies are not only those who beat you. They are those who are afraid that their past will come back to life. The letter from the unknown sender didn't throw Jacob off balance. On the contrary, it confirmed that his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Someone on the list realized that the chain of revenge was slowly closing in on him. And now, fear was working against him. Jacob was in no hurry to respond. He knew that fear was the best tool when it wasn't scattered. And he decided to let them wait. Let them think. Let every night be restless for them. But the letter revealed another detail. Some of them had joined forces. Perhaps one or two of the others on the list already suspected who was behind it all. And Jacob had to act differently. He began sending letters. But not threats. On the contrary, invitations. In beautiful, elegantly designed envelopes. Each one contained only one sentence. "Come and see what we are building." And below that was the address of Silent Power. The first to arrive was the one he did not expect to see. Brandon. He entered the hall silently. There was no arrogant gait, no confident smile. His face was haggard. His eyes were empty. He approached Jacob and said, "I don't know if it's you, but if it is, I didn't come to apologize. I came to look you in the eye. Because every night I wake up from a dream where I'm not me. I'm you." It was strange, but honest. Jacob didn't answer right away. He just pointed to the hall. The children, the women, people who had never had the strength before were now learning to stand up straight. Brandon looked on silently. Then he said, "If you'll let me, I want to help. Not for you, for them, and for myself." Thus began a new turning point. One of the torturers became a builder. Brandon began advising Silent Power on financial matters and helping to launch a new program for adult men who had once been aggressors. It was the greatest transformation Jacob had ever seen. Not a transition from pain to strength, but from strength to understanding. But not everyone was ready for change. One of those left behind, Anthony, posted a message online hinting at a man with a dark past seeking revenge. The photo was blurred, the face was not visible, but the meaning was clear. It was a challenge, and Jacob accepted it. He didn't hide. For the first time, he spoke publicly, not as an instructor, but as a survivor of violence. He told his story without names, but with complete honesty. His speech garnered hundreds of views, and the comments were full of gratitude. People recognized themselves. While Anthony tried to intimidate, Jacob turned the truth into strength. The last names on the list remained. And now it wasn't Jacob who was coming for them. They themselves began to fear the darkness, because silence no longer protected them. With each passing day, Jacob's list grew shorter. But the anxiety inside him did not subside, because the closer he got to the end, the deeper he had to look inside himself. And the harder it was not to cross the line he had so carefully avoided all these years. Anthony, the last one to openly challenge him, was still silent. After Jacob's public speech, he no longer posted anything or appeared online. But Jacob knew it wasn't surrender. It was building up. So he decided to act first. The plan was simple, straightforward. For the first time, no kidnappings, no dark rooms. For the first time, face-to-face. Anthony worked for a security company. Ironic, considering his past. Jacob entered the premises during his lunch break. Everyone was on shift. Except him. "Hi, Anthony," Jacob said calmly. He looked up, and for a moment, as if a time machine had frozen, Anthony's face froze. The same tension, the same play of muscles on his jaw. "It's you," he said. "It's me, but not for revenge, and not for show, just to look you in the eye." Anthony was silent. Jacob sat down opposite him. "You know, you were the only one I was really afraid of, because you didn't play games. You broke people, and you did it so well that even the teachers were afraid to say a word. But you forgot something. I survived." "I didn't forget," Anthony replied quietly. "I hoped you wouldn't survive." The words weren't unexpected, but they hit him hard. "And now you're here," he added. "Everyone talks about your center, your speeches, and I'm left with nothing to say. Do you want to talk?" Anthony shrugged. "I don't know how. I don't know who I am anymore, now that I've stopped beating people up." Jacob nodded. "That's the way. The fear doesn't go away, but it stops controlling you." They talked for an hour, without raising their voices, without reproaches, just two men who had once been enemies and now stood before a shared truth. Before leaving, Anthony asked, "So what now? Is it over?" "That's up to you," Jacob replied. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm returning the mirrors." When Jacob returned to Silent Power, journalists were waiting in his office. He was invited to appear on a national show to tell his story to millions. He agreed, but on one condition. He would not talk about himself, but about those who came every day, those who were still searching for themselves among the ruins. That evening, when the training session ended, Jacob remained alone. He opened an old notebook, the same one where he had once written his list. There was one empty space left. He took out a pen, and instead of a name, he wrote, "Me," because the most dangerous enemy is not the one who hits you. It is the one who carries pain inside and never lets go. Jacob stood behind the scenes of a large studio in New York. Cameras, lights, dozens of eyes. Everything was new and unfamiliar. But he wasn't afraid. Not now. Sitting nearby were the hosts of a national talk show where his voice would be heard. The story of a boy who had been broken and picked himself up from the pieces. When his time came, he stepped onto the stage. The audience greeted him with applause, but Jacob immediately raised his hand. "Thank you, but I'm not a hero. I just survived." He spoke without pathos. About those nights in the school basement, about his first bruise, about shame stronger than pain, about his mother, who brought him to his first gym, about Coach Ray, who taught him to be silent instead of shouting, about Silent Power, which became not a gym, but a refuge for souls. "We all go through hell," he said in the finale, "but not all of us have the opportunity to come back and pull others out of it. If I can be the one to keep the door open, then the whole journey was worth it." After the broadcast, viewers approached him. They hugged him. They thanked him, not like a celebrity, like a person who spoke their truth out loud. When he returned home, Jacob felt that something had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. It was as if an inner burden that had weighed on him for years had now dissolved in the light. He gathered his entire team at Silent Power. "I'm not going to wear a mask anymore," he said. "And it's not because the fear is gone. It's because I'm no longer hiding." He thanked everyone, and he announced a new initiative, a network of free programs for schools across the country. Self-defense courses, lectures on emotional control, support for teenagers. All the resources that had once been out of reach for him. A year later, Silent Power had branches in 12 states. Over 5,000 young people had gone through the program. Jacob remembered some of them personally. In each one, he saw that boy himself. And in the old closet, on the top shelf, lay a list. Closed now. No anger. No revenge. No need to go back. On the last evening of the year, Jacob went out onto the roof of his house. The sky above Cincinnati was dark, without stars. But inside, there was light. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I am free." And for the first time in his life, it was true.